Charles Farrow was an ordinary man with an ordinary life. He lived in a small, cozy apartment on Earth, far from the stars and galaxies that others often dreamed about. His days were spent at his desk job, working at a local tech company, and his nights were filled with books, movies, and the occasional walk in the park. Nothing exciting ever happened to him, and he was fine with it. He was content. That was until the day he received the letter. It was an official-looking envelope, marked with strange symbols that he didn't recognize. The letter had a message written in a language he didn't understand, yet somehow he could read it. The letter told him that he had inherited something important, something valuable. At first, Charles thought it was some kind of mistake. After all, who would leave an inheritance to a regular guy like him? He was shocked when he saw the name at the bottom of the letter. Zathor. Zathor was no ordinary person. He was an alien from a distant planet called Zorax. Charles had met Zathor years ago, through an intergalactic peace program that aimed to promote diplomacy between Earth and other alien civilizations. Zathor had been Earth's ambassador from Zorax, a tall, intelligent being with shimmering skin and glowing eyes. The two of them had become friends during Zathor's time on Earth, but Charles never thought much about his alien friend's personal life. Now, it seemed that Zathor was gone. The letter explained that Zathor had passed away unexpectedly, and in his will, he had named Charles as the sole heir to his vast fortune. It didn't make sense. Zathor was an ambassador, a leader, someone with power and influence. Why would he leave everything to Charles? And what did it mean that Charles had inherited more than just wealth? The letter mentioned something else, something that made Charles' heart race. Zathor's wife, Jareth, was now under his care. Jareth. The name alone sent a shiver down Charles' spine. She was beautiful, elegant, mysterious, and wise. Jareth was no ordinary alien either. She was not only a companion to Zathor, but also a powerful figure in her own right, with knowledge far beyond anything Earth could comprehend. People whispered that she held secrets that could change the course of history. But what was she doing with Zathor? And why was she now part of the inheritance? The letter told Charles that his responsibility was not just to claim the fortune, but to look after Jareth. He was to help her transition into life on Earth, guide her through this new chapter, and ensure her safety. The words were formal, but the underlying message was clear. Jareth was not just some average alien. She was someone who needed protection. With trembling hands, Charles reread the letter. His head was spinning. How could he, a normal man, suddenly find himself in charge of such an enormous responsibility? He had no idea where to start, or what he was even supposed to do. Still, the reality was undeniable. Charles had inherited an unimaginable fortune, a fortune that spanned across planets, containing technology and resources beyond his wildest dreams. But with that wealth came a burden he had never asked for. Jareth was now his responsibility. Later that evening, after hours of trying to process the strange inheritance, Charles sat down on his couch, his mind racing. He knew he had to find out more about Jareth and what her life with Zathor had been like. But he couldn't do it alone. He needed help. He needed answers. The next day, Charles made his first call to the office listed in the letter. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and surprisingly warm. It was someone who worked for the Intergalactic Council, the very organization that Zathor had represented. The voice explained that Charles would be contacted by someone soon, someone who could explain everything in more detail. But until then, Charles had one important task: to meet Jareth. Meeting her was something he had never expected. He had imagined her to be an untouchable figure, someone who belonged to a world far beyond his. But here he was, about to be thrust into her life, a life that was completely alien to him. The thought of meeting Jareth sent a wave of nervousness through him. What would she be like? How would he even begin to understand her world, her ways? Could he really take on this responsibility, this legacy left behind by an alien diplomat? The more Charles thought about it, the more he realized that his life was about to change forever. He wasn't just inheriting wealth or technology. He was stepping into a galaxy of mysteries, responsibilities, and challenges. And all of it, every strange and unexpected detail, started with Jareth. The doorbell rang, snapping Charles out of his thoughts. He stood up quickly, his heart pounding. Was this the moment when everything would change? He opened the door, and there she stood, Jareth. Her glowing eyes met his, and for a moment, Charles was struck speechless. She was even more breathtaking in person than he could have ever imagined. With an air of calm authority and quiet grace, she stepped inside, her presence filling the room. Charles felt the weight of his new life settle upon him. The journey had just begun. Charles had expected a lot of things when he opened his door to meet Jareth. What he hadn't expected was the overwhelming feeling that she wasn't just a visitor, but someone who had entered his life to stay. She wasn't like anyone he had ever met. Her presence seemed to fill the room, her eyes glowing faintly as they locked onto his. "Charles Farrow," Jareth said, her voice smooth and clear, with an otherworldly calm that put him on edge. "I am Jareth, Xathar's wife. It is a pleasure to finally meet you." Charles stood frozen for a moment, not sure how to respond. She wasn't just beautiful. There was something undeniably powerful about her, something that went beyond her appearance. He quickly stepped aside to let her in, his mind racing with questions. "Please come in," he said, his voice a little shaky. Jareth entered his small apartment gracefully, her movements fluid, almost as if she were gliding. She glanced around, taking in the surroundings with a quiet curiosity. Her eyes didn't miss a single detail: the simple furniture, the quiet atmosphere, the modest space. She seemed so out of place here, in this ordinary world that Charles had always known. "Is this where you live, Charles?" she asked, her tone polite but distant. Charles nodded, trying to gather his thoughts. "Yes, it's simple. I wasn't expecting any of this." Jareth turned to face him, her gaze gentle but intense. "Xathar trusted you with more than just my care. He trusted you with the future of two worlds, yours and mine." Her words hung in the air, making Charles feel as if the weight of the universe was suddenly on his shoulders. He swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. I don't understand. Why me? I'm just a regular guy. What do I have to do with all of this?" Jareth gave a soft smile, though it was tinged with sadness. "You underestimate yourself, Charles. You've always been capable of far more than you realize. You and Xathar shared a bond, a friendship that no one else could replace. That is why he trusted you, and now, that trust passes on to you." She took a seat on the couch, and Charles followed her, still feeling out of place. There was an unease in the air, a quiet tension that made him wonder just how deep Xathar's involvement in the galactic affairs had been. Jareth began to explain the truth about Xathar's legacy. He had been far more than an ambassador. He was a key figure in the Intergalactic Council, a body that worked to maintain peace and stability across the galaxy. But Xathar's death was no accident, as Charles had learned. The peaceful alliances Xathar had worked so hard to build were now at risk. "We were not just partners in life," Jareth said softly, her voice filled with quiet strength. "Xathar and I were part of something greater, a movement for peace that spanned across the stars. And the enemies we made along the way are still very much a threat. They have been watching, waiting for the right moment to strike." Charles sat up straighter. "Enemies? What kind of enemies?" Jareth's expression hardened, the calm she had worn earlier giving way to a deep seriousness. "There are factions in the galaxy, some of them close to the Intergalactic Council, who do not share our vision for peace. The Shadows of Jean, for example. They are a group of powerful beings who want to control the galaxy through force and fear. Xathar's death was no accident. It was orchestrated by them, to weaken the Council and disrupt the fragile peace we have fought for." Charles' head spun. This was more than he had ever imagined. His life, which had once been so simple, was now tangled in a web of galactic politics, power struggles, and ancient conflicts. "But why me?" he asked again, his voice quieter now. "What can I possibly do in all of this?" Jareth looked at him, her glowing eyes softening. "You are the key to bringing about a new beginning. Earth's potential has always been underestimated by many in the galaxy. But Sathar believed in you, and in humanity. He knew that only through your leadership could Earth stand at the center of a new era, one where you, along with the rest of the galaxy, could thrive." She paused for a moment, letting the words settle. "But that means there are many things you need to learn, and it will take time. You must understand the legacy you've inherited, not just the wealth and resources, but the responsibility. The wealth you now have access to is not just for you. It's for Earth, for the future of humanity, and for the peace that Sathar fought so hard to protect." Charles rubbed his temples, trying to process it all. This wasn't just about money or power. This was about something much bigger, about shaping the future of both Earth and the galaxy. He could hardly believe it. "How do I even start?" Charles asked, the weight of the task ahead becoming clearer by the second. Jareth stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the city below. "You start by trusting in yourself, Charles. By trusting that the choices you make can change the world. Sathar knew this about you, and now you must believe in it too." Charles followed her gaze out the window, his mind racing. He had never imagined his life could be so complicated, so filled with challenges. But as he looked at Jareth, standing strong and confident, he knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning, and he was ready, though uncertain, to face whatever came next. The days following Jareth's arrival passed in a blur for Charles. He was still adjusting to the strange new reality he found himself in. No longer was he just a man working a regular job in a small, quiet apartment. Now he was a part of something far greater, something that stretched across the stars, and the weight of it all was heavy on his shoulders. Every day, Jareth taught him something new. At first, it was about the fortune he had inherited, vast sums of wealth, advanced technologies, and properties across various planets. But as time passed, the lessons grew more profound. Jareth began to show Charles the true significance of Sathar's legacy. It wasn't just the money or the land. It was the knowledge that could change the course of humanity's future. "I've seen what Earth is capable of, Charles," Jareth said one evening as they sat together in his apartment, a map of the galaxy glowing between them. "The potential for greatness is within you all, but it's up to you to guide your world to that future." Charles looked at her, her features illuminated by the soft light from the map. Her eyes, though calm, held a depth of wisdom that felt otherworldly. He had never imagined himself as someone who could lead an entire planet, let alone a galaxy. But the more he listened to Jareth, the more he began to understand the gravity of his position. "How can I possibly do all of this?" Charles asked, his voice filled with doubt. "I'm not a leader. I'm just a regular guy. How can I shape the future of a world, of a galaxy?" Jareth smiled softly, her gaze warm and understanding. "That's the beauty of it, Charles. You don't have to be a leader by birth or by training. You have something far more important, humanity's greatest strength, your ability to adapt, to grow, and to form connections with others." She leaned forward, her voice lowering, as if sharing a secret. "Sathar always believed that humanity's greatest asset was its capacity for empathy. Your people can see beyond the stars, beyond the differences between species, and find common ground. That's what the galaxy needs now, a unifier. And I believe you can be that person." Charles sat back in his chair, processing her words. The idea of being a leader, someone who could unite entire civilizations, still felt too big, too impossible. But deep down, something stirred in him, a flicker of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, he could rise to the challenge. Over the next few weeks, Charles and Jareth spent more time together. They would talk for hours about the galaxy, its people, and the future. Jareth shared stories of distant planets, each one more wondrous and strange than the last. She told him about the Valari, the ancient race she belonged to, who had mastered technologies that could heal entire ecosystems or bend the laws of physics. She spoke of the Intergalactic Council, a body made up of species from countless worlds, working together to maintain peace and prosperity. But there was more to Jareth than just her knowledge. Slowly, as Charles spent more time with her, he began to see the person she truly was, the woman behind the alien intellect. Despite her calm and composed exterior, Jareth had a deep sadness in her eyes. She missed Sathor, the partner she had loved for so long. Their bond had been built over years of mutual respect, understanding, and shared goals. And now, with Sathor gone, Jareth was left to navigate the unfamiliar and dangerous world that had once been his. One evening, after a long discussion about the political struggles in the galaxy, Jareth confided in Charles. "I never asked for this," she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. "I never wanted to be in a position of such responsibility." Sathor was the one who carried the weight. He was the diplomat, the negotiator. I was his support, his partner. But now, I must stand alone. Charles could hear the vulnerability in her words, and for the first time, he saw Jareth not as an alien diplomat or a powerful being, but as a person, someone who had lost so much and was trying to find her way forward. "You don't have to stand alone," Charles said, his voice gentle but firm. "I'm here. I don't know how I can help, but I'll do whatever I can. You're not alone in this, Jareth." For a moment, Jareth didn't speak. Her glowing eyes softened as she looked at him. And for the first time, Charles saw a hint of something more, a deep sense of gratitude, but also something else. Perhaps it was hope. "Thank you, Charles," she said, her voice barely audible. "That means more to me than you know." From that moment on, something shifted between them. Their bond, which had started out of necessity, began to deepen into something more. Jareth was no longer just a responsibility Charles had inherited. She was someone he genuinely cared about. And in turn, Jareth began to see Charles not as just an heir to a fortune, but as someone with the strength and potential to shape the future. The more they learned about each other, the more Charles realized that his feelings for Jareth were evolving too. There was something magnetic about her. Her wisdom, her strength, and the kindness that radiated from her. He had never imagined himself falling for someone like her, someone so different from everything he knew. Yet there it was. He felt a connection that went beyond friendship, something that was real and undeniable. As their relationship deepened, so did their understanding of the challenges ahead. Jareth wasn't just looking for a partner to help her navigate this new life. She was looking for someone who could stand by her side, someone who could help her rebuild what had been lost and protect the fragile peace that Sathor had worked so hard to create. And in that moment, Charles realized that he wasn't just inheriting a fortune. He was inheriting a future that was now tied to Jareth, and to the fate of both their worlds. The weeks passed quickly, and Charles began to understand more of the life he had inherited. He had not only inherited wealth, technology, and lands on distant planets, but also responsibilities that were as vast as the galaxy itself. Despite the magnitude of it all, he found himself adjusting, learning more about what it meant to be at the center of such a significant role in the galaxy's future. He spent his days working with Jareth, absorbing all the information she shared, and learning about the Intergalactic Council's politics. But even more pressing than the political intricacies was the constant undercurrent of danger. The more Jareth explained, the clearer it became that Sathor had left behind more than just a fortune. He had left a trail of enemies, and those enemies would stop at nothing to see the peace Sathor had worked for unravel. One evening, as they sat in his apartment, a soft chime echoed in the air. It was an alert from the communication device Jareth had set up in the corner. She had taught Charles how to use it, but he had never used it on his own. This time, Jareth walked over and activated it. A holographic image of a figure appeared, The person was tall, wearing an elaborate cloak that shimmered with strange symbols. His face was covered, but his voice was calm and confident. "Jareth," the figure said, his tone filled with authority. "It's time for you to face the truth. The Council cannot protect you forever." Jareth's face tightened at the sound of his voice. She didn't speak immediately, but Charles could sense the tension in the air. "Loras," Jareth said quietly, her voice steady despite the clear weight of her words. "You're a fool if you believe you can control the fate of the galaxy by forcing my hand." The figure, Loras, gave a cold chuckle. "Your husband may be gone, but that doesn't mean his influence is gone with him. The balance of power has shifted, and you're alone now, Jareth. If you think the Council can protect you from the shadows of Jean, you are gravely mistaken." Charles stood up from his chair, sensing the danger in the conversation. He didn't understand the full depth of what was happening, but he could feel that this was a moment of great significance. Jareth's expression was unreadable, her glowing eyes locked on the figure before her. "Leave Earth and return to Jorax, Jareth," Loras continued. "The shadows will take what is rightfully theirs, and you will not stop them. This is the way it was always meant to be." Jareth's voice became sharp, the calm mask slipping for a brief moment. "I will never return to Jorax under your terms, Loras. I do not fear the shadows of Jean. You will see soon enough that Sather's death was not the end. It was the beginning." Loras seemed to hesitate for a moment. Then his hologram flickered and the image faded away. Charles, still processing the exchange, looked at Jareth, his mind racing with questions. "What just happened?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Who is that, and what is the shadow of Jean?" Jareth turned to him, her expression softening, though the weight of the conversation lingered in the air. "Loras is a high-ranking official from the Intergalactic Council," she explained, her tone serious. "He was once an ally of Sather, but after his death, he aligned himself with those who seek power through fear and control. The Shadows of Jean are a secretive group of beings who operate from the shadows, manipulating events in the galaxy for their own gain. They have been trying to disrupt the Council for years." Charles felt a chill run through him. "So they were behind Sather's death?" Jareth nodded, her eyes darkening. "Yes. Sather was a threat to their plans. He was too strong an influence for them to allow him to live. And now, with him gone, they believe they can easily take control." Charles felt a rush of emotions: fear, anger, confusion. He had thought that inheriting Sather's fortune would mean a life of luxury, or at least a quiet existence. But now he was learning that the situation was far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. "So what happens now?" Charles asked, his voice quieter. "What do we do?" Jareth met his gaze, her expression determined. "Now we prepare. We can't wait for them to come to us. The shadows are already at work behind the scenes, pulling strings and causing chaos. We need to be ready to confront them before they can strike." Charles nodded, though doubt lingered in his mind. How could he, an ordinary man with no experience in galactic politics, fight against a group with so much power? What could he possibly do to protect Jareth, Earth, and the peace Sather had worked so hard to build? Jareth seemed to sense his uncertainty. "You are stronger than you know, Charles. The strength you need is not in the weapons or the technology at your disposal. It is in your ability to make alliances. The galaxy is vast, and many species are waiting for the right moment to act. We must unite them, show them that humanity is ready to take its place among the stars." Her words were filled with conviction, and Charles couldn't help but feel a spark of hope. He didn't know how to unite galaxies or defeat the shadows of Jean, but he trusted Jareth. He trusted that together they could find a way. "We'll do it together," Charles said, his voice steadying as he spoke. "We'll unite Earth and the galaxy. We'll fight for the peace Sather wanted." Jareth's eyes softened, a flicker of gratitude in her gaze. "Yes, together." And with that, they made their first move. It wasn't just a battle for survival anymore. It was a fight for the future of humanity and the galaxy. The war against the shadows of Jean had begun, and Charles knew that the path ahead would be filled with danger and uncertainty. But he also knew that, with Jareth by his side, he wasn't alone, and that gave him hope. In the days that followed Loris's warning, Charles and Jareth worked tirelessly, preparing for the storm that was sure to come. They knew that the shadows of Jean would not wait for long before making their move. The time had come to act, but the path forward was unclear. Charles felt a mix of anticipation and fear as he realized that his world, the quiet life he had known, was gone. The galaxy was now his reality, and it was filled with danger and unknowns. Jareth had always been calm and collected, but Charles could see the strain beneath the surface. She was dealing with the loss of her husband, Xathor, and now the looming threat of the shadows. But despite everything, she remained focused on their goal: to unite the galaxy, to stand strong against the forces that wanted to tear it apart. "Charles, we need to gather support," Jareth said one evening as they sat together, reviewing data on the holographic map. "The Intergalactic Council will be divided, especially after Xathor's death. We can't rely on them to defend us. We need to seek out the neutral factions, the ones who believe in peace." Charles nodded, understanding the urgency. He had always considered Earth a small, insignificant part of the universe, but now, with Jareth's guidance, he was beginning to see its potential. Humanity had the power to change the course of the galaxy, but only if they could convince others to stand with them. The first step in their plan was to reach out to key leaders across the galaxy, leaders who had no allegiance to the shadows of Jean. Jareth had already begun the process, sending out diplomatic signals to planets known for their neutral stance in galactic conflicts. It was a risky move, but one that they had no choice but to take. "We need to speak with the Valdorans," Jareth said, her eyes fixed on a distant planet on the map. "They are known for their technological advancements and their neutrality in conflicts. If we can win them over, they could provide us with the resources we need to stand up to the shadows." Charles had heard of the Valdorans before. They were a peaceful race, deeply committed to scientific exploration and diplomacy. But their technology was unmatched, and their influence was far-reaching. Gaining their support would be a massive victory, one that could turn the tide in their favor. The journey to the Valdoran homeworld was long and dangerous, but Charles and Jareth were undeterred. They traveled aboard a ship from Xathor's personal fleet, a sleek vessel equipped with advanced technology. It was the first time Charles had seen such a ship up close, and he marveled at its capabilities. The ship was a symbol of Xathor's legacy, and now it was theirs to command. As they neared the Valdoran system, Charles couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty. This was the first real test of their plan. If they failed to win the Valdorans over, it could mean the end before it even began. But Jareth remained calm. She had confidence in their mission and in Charles. She had spent years building relationships with leaders across the galaxy, and she knew that diplomacy was often the most powerful weapon of all. The Valdoran delegation met them on a lush green planet known for its vast forests and pristine lakes. The environment was peaceful and serene, a sharp contrast to the tense atmosphere that had surrounded them for the past few days. As Charles and Jareth stepped onto the landing platform, they were greeted by the Valdoran ambassador, a tall, elegant figure named Callan. "Welcome, Jareth of the Valari and Charles of Earth," Callan said, his voice melodic and warm. "We have been following the events surrounding your world and the Lake Xathor. You have come at a time of great uncertainty." Jareth nodded, acknowledging the weight of Callan's words. "Ambassador Callan, we come not just for the sake of Earth, but for the entire galaxy. The shadows of Jean seek to disrupt the peace, to bring chaos where there should be order. We need your help." Callan's eyes studied them both carefully, his expression neutral. "You ask for much, Jareth. The Valdorans have long remained neutral in galactic affairs. We do not seek war. What makes you believe that we should take sides in this conflict?" Charles stepped forward, feeling the pressure of the moment. He had never been one for speeches or grand gestures, but something about the situation stirred something inside him. He spoke with sincerity, his voice steady. "We don't want war either," Charles said, "but we can't stand by while peace is shattered. We've seen what the shadows of Jean are capable of. They'll stop at nothing to gain control, to bend everyone to their will. If we don't act now, the galaxy will fall into darkness." Jareth stood beside him, her gaze unwavering. "The people of Earth may be small in comparison to the mighty civilizations of the galaxy, but we have something that sets us apart. We fight for what's right. We fight for peace, for unity. And if you stand with us, together, we can ensure that the future is one where all races can coexist in harmony." There was a long pause as Callan considered their words. The Valdoran ambassador was not easily swayed, but there was something about Jareth's resolve and Charles's passion that made him pause. Finally, he spoke. "We will offer you our support," Callan said, his voice filled with conviction. "But know this, our people will not engage in violence. We will offer our resources, our technology, and our wisdom, but only if the path to peace remains a diplomatic one." Jareth's eyes softened with gratitude. "Thank you, Ambassador. Your support means more than you know." Charles exhaled, a weight lifting from his chest. They had done it. They had secured their first ally, and with it, the hope that they could turn the tide against the shadows of Jean. As they prepared to leave the Valdoran homeworld, Jareth turned to Charles, a rare smile gracing her lips. "This is just the beginning, Charles. Together, we will build the alliance we need to bring peace to the galaxy." Charles nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead was still uncertain, but with allies like the Valdorans and Jareth by his side, he knew that anything was possible. The alliance with the Valdorans marked a significant turning point in Charles and Jareth's struggle against the shadows of Jean. The Valdorans' support not only provided them with advanced technology, but also a network of diplomats and strategists who could help them navigate the complexities of galactic politics. But despite this victory, they knew the battle was far from over. The shadows of Jean were a powerful and secretive force, and their reach stretched far beyond what they had seen so far. The days following their successful diplomatic mission were filled with planning and strategy. Charles, still overwhelmed by the weight of his new role, leaned heavily on Jareth's guidance. She was his rock, a source of wisdom and strength as they moved forward. But even she could not deny the growing sense of urgency. The shadows of Jean were closing in. One evening, as they gathered in the command room of their ship, Jareth looked over the latest intelligence reports. A holographic map of the galaxy spun before them, showing the positions of various factions and the locations of known shadows activity. "We've made progress," Jareth said, her voice calm but tense. "The Valdorans have delivered what they promised: technology, medical resources, and support from several neutral factions. But the shadows are moving faster than we anticipated." Charles watched as the holographic map zoomed in on a cluster of planets at the edge of the galaxy. "What is this?" he asked, pointing to the red markings that indicated areas of heavy shadows activity. "That's the Jean territory," Jareth replied. "It's where the shadows of Jean are based. They've been gathering their forces there, and I believe they're preparing for something big. We can't wait any longer. If we want to stop them, we need to strike before they do." Charles felt a surge of determination. "What's our next move?" Jareth turned to him, her eyes full of purpose. "We need to infiltrate their territory. We'll start by sending a small team to gather intelligence. Once we know their plans, we can act." The plan was risky, but Charles understood that they had no choice. The shadows of Jean were too dangerous to let them continue unchallenged. They needed to gather information to disrupt whatever scheme they were planning. The team they assembled was small but skilled. It included members from the Valdoran fleet, human soldiers from Earth, and Jareth's most trusted allies. Charles was not part of the mission. His role for now was to stay behind and coordinate efforts from their ship. It was a strategic decision. Jareth needed him to stay safe so he could continue leading their cause. Still, Charles couldn't help but feel a pang of frustration. He wanted to do more. He had been thrust into a leadership role, but there were moments when he longed for a sense of purpose that went beyond mere planning. As the team prepared for their mission, Jareth pulled Charles aside. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. Charles nodded. "I am. I may not be a soldier, but I'll do whatever it takes to help. We can't afford to fail." Jareth gave him a small, encouraging smile. "I know you're ready, but remember, your strength is not in fighting. It's in bringing people together. You have a gift for understanding others, Charles. Use that gift, and you'll lead us to victory." Her words stayed with him as the team left for their mission. Charles watched them depart, a sense of unease gnawing at him. The shadows were closing in, but for the first time, he felt the weight of the responsibility he carried more than ever. The days that followed were tense. The team was in constant communication, relaying updates from their mission. The information they uncovered was shocking. The Shadows of Jean had been working in the shadows for far longer than anyone had realized. They had infiltrated key positions in the Intergalactic Council, manipulating events and stirring up unrest. Their ultimate goal was to plunge the galaxy into chaos, making it easier for them to seize control. One evening, Jareth gathered Charles and the rest of their team in the command room. Her face was grim as she shared the latest findings. "They're preparing for a full-scale attack," Jareth said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "The Shadows of Jean have alliances with several rogue factions. They're planning to strike at the heart of the Intergalactic Council, destabilizing the galaxy and ensuring their control." Charles felt his stomach tighten. "How long do we have?" Jareth's eyes met his, a hard resolve in her gaze. "Not long. We have to act fast. If we don't stop them now, we risk losing everything." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the gravity of the situation. The Shadows of Jean were not just a threat to Earth or the Villari. They were a threat to the entire galaxy. The peaceful future they hoped to create was slipping further out of reach with each passing moment. Charles turned to Jareth, his voice filled with determination. "What's our next step?" Jareth's eyes flickered with thought before she spoke again. "We'll gather our allies, rally the forces of the neutral factions. We need to launch a counterattack. Disrupt their plans before they can execute them. The Valdorans, the Villari, and Earth. All of us will fight together." It was the beginning of something bigger than Charles could have ever imagined. This was no longer about protecting a single planet or a single people. This was about uniting the galaxy in the face of a common enemy, about standing together to preserve the peace that so many had worked for. "Then let's do it," Charles said, his voice steady and sure. "We'll show them that we won't let the galaxy fall." And with that, they prepared for the battle that would determine the fate of the galaxy. It was a fight that would test their courage, their unity, and their resolve. The seeds of rebellion had been planted, and now it was time to watch them grow. The day of reckoning had arrived. The time to act had come, and Charles stood at the forefront of a united galaxy, ready to face the greatest challenge of his life. Jareth, the Valdorans, and the people of Earth had all gathered their strength, forming an alliance that was stronger than any force the galaxy had seen before. Together, they would confront the Shadows of Jean and put an end to their dangerous plans. Charles had never imagined he would be leading such a monumental charge. Just months ago, he had been an ordinary man living on Earth. Now, he was part of a grand movement that could change the course of history. As he stood beside Jareth, looking out over the battle fleet that was assembled for the mission, he realized how much he had learned. The path ahead was uncertain, but he knew that this was their only chance. Jareth's eyes met his, her gaze steady and full of determination. "Are you ready, Charles?" He nodded, feeling the weight of his responsibility. "I am. We've come this far together. We'll finish this together." With a final glance at their fleet, they boarded their ship. the same sleek vessel that had carried them from Earth to the Valdoran homeworld. It was now equipped with the finest technology the galaxy had to offer, and the crew was prepared for the fight of their lives. The Shadows of Jean had no idea what was coming. The plan was simple. They would strike at the heart of the Shadows' operations, targeting their stronghold in the Jean territory. The galaxy's forces would work together to disrupt the Shadows' communication lines and weaken their leadership, all while keeping their own ships protected from counterattacks. As their fleet made its way toward the Jean territory, the tension was palpable. Charles couldn't help but glance around at the faces of those on board. The soldiers, diplomats, and leaders, each one was a part of something much larger than themselves. For the first time, he felt the true weight of unity. They were not just fighting for their homes, their people, or their planet. They were fighting for the future of the entire galaxy. The journey to the Jean territory was long, and every minute felt like an eternity. Charles spent much of the time in the command center, going over tactical plans with Jareth and the other leaders. But as the fleet entered the outer reaches of the Jean territory, everything became real. The stars around them seemed darker, as if the very galaxy itself was holding its breath. "We're entering their space," Jareth said, her voice calm but alert. "Brace yourselves. The Shadows will know we're here." As if on cue, the sensors on the ship lit up with alerts. Enemy ships were closing in. The Shadows of Jean had been waiting for them. "We'll have to move fast," Jareth said, her tone sharp. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers." The battle began in an instant. Ships darted through space, exchanging fire with the enemy. Charles watched, his heart pounding in his chest, as their fleet engaged the Shadows' forces. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. Bright flashes of light filled the darkness of space, and the sounds of battle echoed through the ship's command center. Charles felt a surge of adrenaline. He wasn't on the front lines, but he knew that his role was just as important. He had to guide the fleet, keep everyone working together, and ensure that the Shadows couldn't escape. "Keep those communication lines open," Jareth ordered, her voice unwavering. "We need to stay coordinated. Charles, we rely on you now." Charles nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. It wasn't just about military strategy. It was about leadership. He had to inspire confidence, to ensure that the unity they had built wouldn't fall apart in the face of danger. As the battle raged on, Charles worked tirelessly to relay information, direct fleet movements, and make sure that the Alliance's ships stayed protected. The Shadows of Jean were powerful, but they were not invincible. The combined forces of Earth, the Valdorans, and the Valari were proving to be a formidable force. Jareth's voice crackled over the comms again. "We're moving closer to their stronghold. Get ready." This is where we ended. Charles's heart skipped a beat. They were about to reach the heart of the enemy's operations. The battle had reached its final phase, and he knew that this moment would define the future of the galaxy. The fleet pushed forward, charging through waves of enemy ships, and as they neared the Shadows' stronghold, Charles saw the massive structure come into view. It was a dark, imposing fortress, built on a moon that orbited a dying star. The Shadows of Jean had made their home in the most inhospitable place in the galaxy, but now it was time to tear it down. "This is it," Jareth said, her voice filled with determination. "We breached the stronghold now. Keep your focus. The galaxy depends on this moment." With a deep breath, Charles gave the order. "Full speed ahead. Let's finish this." The final assault was brutal. The Shadows fought back fiercely, but the combined might of their alliance was overwhelming. Charles felt a rush of emotions, fear, hope, and resolve, all merging into one as their forces advanced. They were close now, closer than ever before. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the enemy's defenses began to crumble. The Shadows of Jean were losing ground. The stronghold that had once seemed so impenetrable was now falling apart, piece by piece. Jareth's voice came through once more, stronger than ever. "It's over. We've done it." The room erupted in cheers as the battle came to a victorious end. The shadows of Jean had been defeated, their plans crushed. The galaxy had been saved, and a new era of peace was beginning. Charles, exhausted but exhilarated, looked at Cherith. She smiled, her eyes filled with pride. "We did it, Charles. Together, we've changed the future." For the first time in a long while, Charles felt a deep sense of peace. They had done it. The galaxy was safe, and humanity had earned its place among the stars. And as the stars above them twinkled, the future stretched out before them, bright, hopeful, and full of possibility. The war was over, but the journey was just beginning.